Cool. Oh, wait. Oh, yeah, cool. All right, so today I'm going to talk about Maurice Merleau-Ponty, just a general overview. There's a lot of different things that he did. Um, and so what I wanted to do first was to compare kind of where he lies in the schools of thought and philosophy. Um, the UC Davis, like I said earlier, is an analytic philosophy department, and analytic philosophy kind of started taking shape in the 1900s to present time. They've kind of survived for a long time. And then there were these three other types of schools of thought: phenomenology, existentialism, and structuralism. Uh, so typically, analytic philosophers they regard everything that's not analytical as continental, but really there's no continental. The continental is actually various other schools of thought that are not analytical. Um, so phenomenology started in the 1900s as well, and to the 1960s, all these kind of started transforming in the 1960s. Phenomenology kind of started being regarded less of its own philosophy and more of just as a method that philosophers tended to use. And so then after the 60s, the movements of post-structuralism and postmodernism started becoming more prevalent in the continental side of things. And Merleau-Ponty happens to sit right here. He was born in 1908 and died fairly young in 1961. And what he was working towards the end was he was trying to transcend the three sorts of schools of thought, and he was trying to provide an alternative that he thought was more robust. But he died before these movements came out, right? These movements were a reaction to these movements. So these movements kind of had some central tenets. These movements said, okay, let's abandon all those. Let's start all over from scratch. But Merleau-Ponty would have had a middle ground that I find more pleasing. But he died, so that sort of alternative school of thought could never happen. So what a lot of modern scholars, they're revisiting Merleau-Ponty now and trying to create this alternative that's really needed, because there's a lot of open problems in post-structuralism and postmodernism that don't seem to be solvable. So it's really exciting. He's dead, but he's alive in us. Okay, so on methods. So analytic philosophers focus on understanding logic, functions, and solving puzzles thereof. So this very simple idea. There's inputs, there's logical functions. So whenever you put input, there's some machinery that happens there, and then there's an output. And if your input is useful and your logical functions are well designed, then your output's useful. And analytic philosophers really like to focus on the logic. Like how exactly are we making sense of the if and then statements and the conditionals and all that sort of stuff, which programmer computer scientists also like to think about. Phenomenology as a method, on the other hand, wants to focus on accounts. And then accounts are generally the views that define what constitutes an input in the first place. So the idea is, if these aren't well defined and well understood, then shit in, shit out sort of thing, right? So if you really question the input, you're also therefore questioning the outputs. And then of course logic is always implicitly there, and the phenomenologist doesn't ignore that they exist. Phenomenologist kind of just embraces whatever is present at the time. So let me give you an example of this distinction in actual practice, though, because this is really abstract, I'm sure, pretty useless. So let's talk about ghosts. You guys ready to talk about ghosts? Okay, so here's a story. This is actually a real story. My friend, he works at Delta Venus, and he was working late at night, so he's telling me, he came home, he's like, I was working late at night by myself, and I hear sounds, and I saw a shadowy movement at the corner of my eyes. I turn my head, but I don't see anything. Nevertheless, I remain cautious and terrified, and he comes home as soon as possible, right? So he thinks he saw a ghost. He's like, I think maybe ghosts are real. And I'm like, whoa, that's really cool. So how would an analytic philosopher treat this? I will, where are my markers? So what an analytic philosopher would do is they would say, okay, so here you are. You probably can't see that. Here you are working late at night. Something happens and you have this idea. Can I get a better marker back there somewhere? Actually, we'll do green. So I'm working, here's my bench. And you have this idea, and it's like, it's this ghost. And so ghosts are, what are the properties of ghosts? So properties of ghosts, we said that they're visible, because he saw something. They're immaterial. They can move through things, move through walls, and they make sounds, because he heard something, right? But if we know anything about the human ear, we know that sounds are actually physically vibrating, physical vibrations of molecules right in the air. So if ghosts are immaterial, that means that they can't interact with physical things. How can they possibly make sounds? Doesn't make sense, right? So the analytic philosopher would just immediately say, therefore ghosts don't exist, right? Logically impossible. Doesn't make sense. Okay, so that's how the analytic philosopher would treat this problem. A phenomenologist would treat it a little differently. Okay, so a phenomenologist would say, cool, you experienced a ghost. You were terrified. Obviously, there was something that happened to you. Like, you don't want to come to work anymore, right? So something happened. It wasn't that it didn't exist. Like, something is there. Something existed. Something happened. Because if ghosts didn't really exist, you would have been the same person before and after, right? So there's something that happened. Of course, phenomenologists would also completely agree with the analytic philosopher, though. So how do you reconcile that? How can you tell someone that they really experienced a ghost and also agree with the analytic philosopher and say that ghosts don't exist? Okay, so the idea here is a phenomenologist is focused on the account of what actually happened. So something actually did happen. There was an experience that happened. There was a sound. So we have a sound. And that alerted the person, and scared the person. Hello, welcome, come in, hi. No worries. We're just talking about ghosts.
Nice.
So to recap, we're talking about ghosts. We're talking about the difference between analytic philosophy and phenomenology, and how analytic philosophers would treat the problem of ghosts and how phenomenologists would treat the problem of ghosts. And to recap, we said that, this is my friend working late at night, he thought he saw a ghost. That's his account right here. Analytic philosopher would say, the properties of ghosts, they're visible, they're material, and make sounds doesn't make sense, because if it's immaterial, it can't interact with sound waves. So it's logically impossible, and ghosts can't exist. On the other hand, a phenomenologist would say that my friend actually did experience a ghost. But there's a more nuanced explanation to it. My friend actually experienced something which he then called it a ghost. That's the difference. So perhaps maybe there's like a little mouse in the corner here, and there was like a broom, and he topped over the broom, and then that made a sound. And maybe he was just really, really tired. He was like chopping vegetables for so many hours, and like maybe his eyes got tired, and like he thought he saw something and moved across, and it was like in conjunction with that. But that complex mixture of contextualized experience is what a ghost is to him. And not only that, if you put anyone else in his position and you put them under the same conditions, they probably would also think they saw ghosts, right? So what we really mean when a phenomenologist says you experienced a ghost, we really mean you experienced the mouse in the corner that toppled over the broom, that made the sound, and in which you were tired, and then you had all these things that happened. Instead of saying that, we just say, that's ghost phenomena. Right? Cool. Good so far? Does that make sense? So do ghosts really exist? I don't know. There was an experience there.
Is that similar to out-of-body experiences? What does phenomenology say about?
Yes. Out-of-body experience. Well, let's talk about that afterward. Yeah, we'll have some more examples. Yeah. So if you notice what the analytic philosopher did, the analytic philosopher quickly went outside the context. They kind of didn't care about the account as much. They just thought, what was happening in a thought bubble, right? Conceptualized ghosts. How do we conceptualize ghosts? These are the properties of ghosts. They focused on what's in here, And so analytic philosophers like to focus on what's in the thought bubble. Whereas phenomenologists like to focus on the context that created thought bubble in the first place. And so the reason why this is an interesting difference in method is because an analytic philosopher would then start making statements like, your belief in ghosts made you afraid, right? So in other words, ghosts, your belief in ghosts produced fear. But that's the exact opposite of what happened. The fear experience made you think ghost. I mean, you could have thought it was a poltergeist or a witch or any number of other things. But we get more nuance in a bit, so let's keep moving forward. Okay, so the next thing I'd like to talk about is, actually I'll let you guys work on this one. So these are things that you should talk amongst yourselves. Hello, welcome, sit down. So here are other examples. Phantom limbs. So there's a lot of war veterans, they get their arm chopped off or their hand chopped off, but for whatever reason they still feel like something's still there. And then there's the Zollner illusion, which is very famous. Here you see lines that are hashed out, and they look like, these two lines look like they're going to meet, and these two lines look like they're going to meet like that and like that. So talk amongst yourselves for just 30 seconds. Pick one or the other and try to figure out what would the analytic philosophers say about these experiences and what would the phenomenologists say.
Wait, I don't get the illusion. What are we supposed to be saying?
I think the lines look like they're going to meet, but they're not really.
Is that what the analytic philosopher would say, or what the
No, I
phenomenologist
mean,
would say?
like, what are we saying? I don't know what I'm supposed to see. Yeah.
Oh, you don't see it. Oh. Okay. If I was to take a ruler, this piece of paper, and say that's here to here, right? Yeah. It doesn't actually change at all when you go to the bottom. So the lines are actually perfectly parallel when I take the ruler and show you guys. But we don't experience that.
Wait, what?
It looks like the two lines are going like
It looks like they're about to meet if they keep going down.
But they're perfectly parallel.
That's a Zollner illusion. So what would the phenomenologist say, and what would the analytic philosopher say about? Let's just take the Zollner illusion because we're focusing on that. Who wants to give it a go?
I think the analytical philosopher would say like your brain like processes it differently, but they're really just parallel lines. The phenomenologist would say something like they do come together because that's what you see and that's your experience or whatever, something like that.
Cool. Yeah. Does anyone else have a different take on that?
I guess phenomenology, we would just like say maybe like we cannot really rely on the phenomenology that we receive because we actually receive these kind of stuff and we get to the different conclusions through real things.
So let me paraphrase. You said phenomenologists would say we can't really rely on the phenomena because it can be shown to not be true, right? It doesn't really represent reality accurately. Okay, cool. So let's step back. So to answer your question, I would say that's actually what the analytic philosopher would say. The analytic philosopher would say that. The analytic philosopher would say, look, these lines are perfectly parallel. This is just an illusion. It just made up in your mind. We just happen to be imperfect creatures, and we just make all these mistakes all the time. Darn, we should be computers instead. And a phenomenologist would say something different. A phenomenologist would say something like you were saying earlier. We experience that those lines are going to meet. So to us, that's true, and that's okay. That's how we experience it. And if we wanted to like graphically design this so that we wanted to have people experience those lines to meet, this is all we'd have to do, right? But then all phenomenologists will also agree that the lines are parallel. What? How is that possible? Like, how can you say on one hand is they're going to meet and the other hand they're parallel? Well, phenomenologists would say the only way that you can show that the lines are parallel is when I take my ruler or my paper, and as soon as I apply the paper to the image, it's an entirely different experience altogether. You see? I'm not experiencing the same thing anymore. I'm experiencing a measured phenomena. And that changes it. So therefore, the truth might change based on the experience. Crazy. Okay, so moving forward. Phantom limbs, by the way, we can discuss that after. I want to keep moving forward, but at the end you can talk to me how phenomenologists or analytic philosophers would treat phantom limbs and out-of-body experiences. Okay, so the next move, a phenomenologist then could make a critique on the analytic philosopher and say that the analytic philosopher has to employ what's called an analytic reduction. So a phenomenologist is trying to comprehend the experience and figure out how to make sense of that experience, where, if you remember, an analytic philosopher wants to hone into the thought bubble or just the way that we conceptualize it and dissect that. So in order to do analytic philosophy, you have to pick only a certain set of features or conceptual structures that apply to that phenomena. And that's necessary in order to apply a discipline to a phenomena. So this happens in economics and physics and music theory. I have a story. I'll do the music theory story. So there's one of my coworkers who was trying to teach me how to sing because I'm a terrible singer. And there's a song that I really like. It's really moving. It just makes me cry every time, right? And I have another friend who's also a musician, and so they were talking about how they might teach me this song. And so, but he had never heard it before. So I'm like, okay, I really have to show you this song because it's so meaningful to me. So I played him the song, and he's just staring at it, expressionless. I'm like, what the fuck's going on? You're not. What's going? Is this song not doing anything for you? And so at the middle, in the middle of the song, he's like, yeah, I could totally teach this to you. It's there's this syncopated beat and this 3/8 time, and there's a weird tone shift over here. And I was like, okay, so this whole time, you were just dissecting it in terms of music theory because he was trying to help me learn it. And then I was like, well, what did you think of the song? He was like, oh yeah, it seemed kind of sad. So, in other words, he was applying an analytic reduction to the experience that he was having. And it's totally useful. It's great. I might be able to learn the song now. But in order to do that, he had to ignore the rest of the phenomena that he was currently experiencing. And then physicists do this all the time. If you take a physics class for the first time, you start seeing vectors everywhere and normal forces, and you just the world becomes the physics you're learning. And economists do this too. They see people as opportunities. There's value exchanges that happen all the time, right? So none of this is bad. What becomes bad is what is considered an analytic reduction fallacy, and that is when you forget that it's a reduction and you don't see anything else. So that is, after you take a lot of economics, you might start seeing people as just exchanges of value. There's nothing more than that to you. And then maybe if you're really into music theory, you're just always thrown off by the technicalities of it that you don't really enjoy it anymore. So that would be considered a fallacy because you're relating to only a small aspect of the phenomena and then treating that as it's the whole thing. So that's a general concern of a phenomenologist. Not to say that analytic reductions aren't useful at times. Okay, so that's the background of the difference between analytic philosophy and phenomenology as methods. And a phenomenologist would warmly embrace analytic philosophy as it's very useful. But it's also very hard to communicate to an analytic philosopher potentially what they're really doing, or what a phenomenologist would consider what's really happening. So Merleau-Ponty, since he comes from the tradition of phenomenology and existentialism, he employs this methodology, which is why I had to introduce it to you. Okay, so Merleau-Ponty heavily critiqued Descartes. So so this is kind of appealing to that. So Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am," and here we have statue of the thinker. He's thinking, and Merleau-Ponty said, or would say, "I experience with and through my body, therefore I am. And coincidentally, that just looks the same. And this goes back to this, right? Like analytic philosophy is focusing on what's happening in this thought bubble, whereas phenomenology is trying to understand the whole experience. Cool. Okay, so I have some general things for you guys to experience now to kind of flesh out these concepts. So I want you guys to close your eyes. And I want you guys to stand up as you close your eyes. Okay, I want you guys to sit back down. Okay. And you guys can open your eyes. Okay. So who wants to volunteer? Anybody? Yeah. How did you know that you weren't sitting down anymore?
The change in the level that I was at, I would say. I didn't feel contact with the chair.
There you go. Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. Anybody else? Anybody can explain how they got up? How they knew they were standing up? Yeah. Try it again. Close your eyes again and really focus. Really focus and stand up. Focus on that experience of standing up. Cool. You can sit back down if you want. You can do it multiple times if you want. You want to say something?
A sense of kinesthesia, where you know where all your body parts are.
Mm.
Your legs are under you, you must be standing.
Mm-hmm. Cool, but how do you know that your legs are under you?
Feel it.
Well, your body actually has this, according to psychology, your body has this sixth sense called kinesthesia, where you know where all your body parts are, so you don't like bite your finger if you're trying to get something out of your mouth.
You have some sort of known spatial mapping. Yeah, true. Okay. However, I would say that that's not how you know you stood up. It's more related to what she said earlier. What happened is when you're sitting down, you feel the chair on your butt. And there's a lot of pressure there. And then when you're standing up, the pressure actually goes onto your feet, right? So I'm sitting down, there's pressure on my butt, and then the pressure is going onto my feet. That's how I know. I don't actually necessarily feel my legs contracting or not. I'm not thinking, how strong am I going to have to contract my muscle in order to get it to reorientate, right? And so this experience is, there's this set of experiences. I just want to, I'll show you why they're important in a moment. But, okay, so I'll keep talking. Next is Amoeba's lunch. So this is actually a video I want you guys to see. If I can get it. This is a pretty crazy video. It goes by really quick. So watch for it. Is it going? There it goes. Oops. So the amoeba here is wrapping around these two bacteria. The bacteria are just like chilling. Then all of a sudden, they realize that they're getting digested. And they start freaking out. Terrified. It's the last moments of life right here you're seeing. Strangled by the amoeba.
How did the scientists know this was happening?
Well, I don't know. We just observed a phenomena. Now we can discuss what happens. For me, when I see that, I see terror. I see, oops, I don't need to see anymore.
There's all these videos of amoeba on YouTube.
There are. The amoebas are very active creatures. But more importantly for me, from a philosophy perspective, is why did the bacteria react that way? It's like, it didn't. Did it have a mind, and did it realize that it was getting eaten? Did it know that it had, only a few moments of life left, where it had to struggle really, really hard, right? And then also, if you were put in the same position, wouldn't you do the exact same thing? So are we, any different than bacteria in terms of how we relate to our external environment. And to the extent that a bacteria reacts like that and we react the same way, what makes us so different, right? So we believe we have a consciousness and we have a mind, and we don't believe bacteria do. They're just single-celled things. They're dumb. They're just automated. But there's such a relationship there that I think the phenomena is very similar as a phenomenologist. So we'll keep probing this moment. It's contentious right now, I know. We just saw the death of 2 living things. Are you guys all right? You guys ready to move on?
I think your vegetarian instincts.
And how do I get this going again?
Oh, they don't? Okay.
But if they were conscious.
But is there consciousness?
That's amoeba's lunch. Okay, cool. So now the next is gestalts, so background and foreground interactions. So there's a huge emphasis on the definition of properties, which is also something that computer scientists do a lot in analytic philosophy. So I'll give you an example. I'm going to draw something on the board. Okay. So we experience this line. We see this line, but would that line be there if the board wasn't here? Or would the experience of the line be the same if the board wasn't there? It wouldn't be there.
No, it's slightly more out.
Yeah, it jumps out at you. If it was a different sort of background, we would experience it differently potentially. And I normally have better visuals in this, but the background can actually affect the way that you see the image in terms of shadowing and stuff. And I can find an image online for you. I should have done that before. But the idea is that there's a lot always present around you all the time. And depending on what your intentions are, what your purposes are, there's things that jump out at you. There's so much happening here. Like I can totally ignore the line. I kind of pointed to it. Now you have to see it. But you can also focus on this little thing right there. And maybe that's the only thing that interests you at the moment. So the point being here is when you try to create a... Hey, pizza guy.
Hello.
Welcome.
How's it going?
Good.
Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. We're getting hungry too. So the point being is when you create any sort of property definitions, you're making certain decisions on which phenomena matter and which ones don't. And why? Why do certain phenomena matter over other phenomena? It's not completely unarbitrary. So we'll revisit that. And then the last experience, or the last concept I want you guys to think about is the first touch. Okay. So Merleau-Ponty talks a lot about the first touch. So the idea is, if you close your eyes again, closing your eyes is part of this experiment because the eyes take so much processing power in the brain, it overshadows all your other senses. But when you close your eyes, we kind of experience other things, like the smell of pizza is really strong right now. And but also, I feel like my palms are really sweaty because I'm terrified up here, and there's other things that are happening to me. But if I was just like to ignore all my senses except for my touch, so I'm feeling like the air moving through my hands right now and kind of brushing past my face. That interaction is what makes me know that I'm here. If I was anesthetized, I wouldn't know anything. It wouldn't exist. Right? If I had no senses at all, if I was just laying in a bed, there would be no me, no consciousness, no awareness of anything. So the first touch is the first time that you engage with something outside of you. And that is actually what tells you that you're alive, and that you're present, that you exist. So therefore, I experience things with and through my body, therefore I am. And that happens way before any thought, which is what his critique of Merleau-Ponty would be.
His critique of
Descartes, my bad, yes. Okay, cool. How are we doing on time? I don't have a clock on me.
I said not exactly sure what we're running by because we started late.
I know. This was meant to be an hour long, so but I'm just gonna go through the end. I don't know if you guys have time frames, but the next thing I want to talk about is philosophy of mind. So I'm gonna try to wrap everything we discussed and try to understand a new conception of the mind based on all the stuff that phenomenologists would bring to bear. So there's two common models of the mind. The dualism model. The dualism model sets up a reality that has a dichotomy between what's considered physical and mental, objective and subjective, fact and opinion. These things are radically different. We argue all the time, like, that's not a fact. I'm not going to pay attention, right? Or whatever, right? But there's loads of philosophical issues that come up in terms of idealism and realism and all these other sorts of things that come up that actually are just manifestations of this dichotomy that's present. So if we can figure out a way of not producing the dichotomy in the first place, then we don't actually have like half of the philosophical puzzles that we have. So the alternative model is called the situated model, or I call it the situated model. Merleau-Ponty would say something in French, and I don't know. But the mind is not in or of the body or the brain, but is instead situated outside in the interaction between the body and the world. Consciousness emerges and takes form from this interaction. So I don't know if you guys know cognitive science, but there is a field within cognitive science that takes this to try to create artificial intelligence based on this new framework of conceptualizing. This provides a radical different way of actually creating artificial intelligence that's actually much more capable of learning and producing things. So what I have is a handout to exemplify this, or to pass them out. Thanks. Efficiency, great, I love it. And there's extra. Let me know because I need one too. Yeah, so I'm going to draw some more pictures. So, okay, so here's how he set up the dualism. I mean, Descartes was sitting in his armchair. I'm going to erase this somehow. There's the eraser back behind you. Leanne, you're so helpful. Thank you for being here. Okay. I don't really expect you guys to read through this whole thing, but you can take it home with you afterward. Okay. So the idea is, okay, here I am. Here's my head. Here's my nose. Here's my mouth. And here's my eyeball. And I see things like, okay, there's a table with really yummy pizza. I mean, I'm also smelling it too. So that image is perceived somehow by me, and that then is reflected onto my brain, or my mind, my brain. And so here I have the image of the pizza again. So the idea is that there's this something in the world, and I perceive it. I somehow am in contact with it, and my brain or my mind remanufactures it so that I can know it. And so what ends up happening is now I have two images. I have something in my mind and something out here. And there's a lot of issues here because now what a philosopher tends to want to do is say, okay, well, what's in here is different than what's out there. This is a mental thing. This is a physical thing, or a non-mental thing. And then the question arises, okay, well, how do I know that what's in my mind actually corresponds to what's out there? Maybe I'm in the Matrix. Maybe there's nothing out there. No pizza at all, just in my mind. Sorry, guys. Or maybe only what's out here matters and what's in my mind doesn't really matter. Just kind of this weird reflection on reality. And if you're like an a phenomenologist, or I don't know what they call them, then nothing in your mind actually matters. And then at that point, well, okay, where's your thoughts? Where's your creativity? Right? This doesn't matter. It's not present. So there's this dichotomy. Also, there's the issue of what's in here is subjective and solely accessible only to me, and what's in here is objective. And other people can see this, so this is the only thing that can really be explored and understood. And so then we have discourse about, the subjective world as being, meaningless or unvalidated, unverifiable, uninteresting. Okay, so that's the dichotomy here, the dualism. That's what unfortunately happens. The discourse, right? The properties that we see that then we churn through logical functions revolve around this problem. So the alternative is, and then sometimes these are what's in here. These are called representations of things that are real. So a non-representational system is a little more complex, but that's on the other side. So the non-representational system is it's a different image, but it's based on everything I've been mentioning earlier today. Here I am, and I am engaging with the pizza, or I'm engaging with something non-me, and in this interaction, there is something that comes out to be pizza. So this right here is actually, so my bad, I just messed it up. I messed it up because I made this look like this, but this is actually unknown. This is murky. This is like shrouded in the fog of war. This is like uncertain reality. Only after I engage with it, only after I try to make sense with it, do I actually have a concept that emerges that I can conceptualize. But this concept that emerges is both shaped by what's non-me and what is me. And so that means the mind is situated here at the interface between what's not me and me, instead of situating it here, which is solely inside me. Okay, so that means that there really isn't difference between opinions and facts, because the difference is in methodology. Facts are interactions that can be repeated. Opinions are interactions that require more interpretation, or have there's different interactions that are produced from individual differences from different people. We'll talk about more of that in a moment. So in terms of philosophy, in terms of what Merleau-Ponty would say, there's really two sorts of domains of understanding our experience. There's the visible and the invisible. And they're both present at the same time. The invisible is kind of the world that we're always in. But as soon as we start trying to make sense of it, it starts becoming visible to us. What is visible to us is always a union of my mind and what's there. And so I can never really know what's there. Can't know. Unknowable. But whatever it is shaping my conception of it. So, it's relevant and important. Okay, so now, any questions about that? Yeah? Do I know what?
I feel like what you said is just like exactly what is like new book, latest book out of our hand.
Oh, cool. He must have read Merleau-Ponty. Yeah. Okay, so there's some examples to motivate this. I'll give you an example. Some people have color blindness, and some two rods or cones or whatever it is. They see less color than most other people. Less color differences. And then there's a very small handful of people that actually see more color than anyone else. Okay, So when you go out there and you're looking at the same exact thing, right? You have these 3 different types of people. The first person that has, this handicap, he says, oh, like I that just looks great to me. And then you have the other person who says, oh, that's because you have this handicap, right? I see like 4 different colors there. But then you have the other person who's like, well, I see 5 different colors there. Like, okay, so who is actually right? Well, when you take a normative perspective, right, everyone, like before you really understand the phenomena, typically you just take the most people that are present, right, would see maybe 3 colors there. And so they would say that there are only 3 colors there, but you might not, your instrument of a body might not be able to perceive it. But the problem is that they can't justify why the other person can see more colors. And the other person, since the other person is such in the minority, that cannot be the norm, right? But that's only a problem because we're trying to say that there's a certain fact about colors. Right? Merleau-Ponty would say, not a problem at all. There's 2 colors for that person, and that's true for that person. There's 3 colors for that other person. There's 4 colors for the other person. Because colors themselves emerge from an interaction. Colors are here. They're not just here, not just in our minds, and they're not present in the world itself. So it's not a fact. Colors aren't facts. They're just interactions. So that's one way of motivating this idea. Okay, cool. So now I want to talk about what Merleau-Ponty's main contributions to philosophy are. And so he adds these 4 terms: intentional arc, grip, expression, and alterity. And okay, so what Merleau-Ponty is trying to do is he's trying to create some sort of framework for understanding the phenomena of life that isn't dualist in nature. And he's trying to solve certain philosophical problems that keep emerging in philosophy. And so these are his master concepts to kind of do that. And maybe I should have a talk just on these. So the idea is intentional arc, that refers to, when I wrote this, the background which inclines us to behave in certain ways. It's kind of vague, I'm sorry. So let me explain what that means. The point is that everyone is purpose-driven. We all have inherent purposes. But the world provides certain avenues for us to move in and apply our purposes, right? So when we're hungry, all of a sudden all the foodstuffs in the world just jump out at us, right? So our intentional arc is both informed by our internal purposes and the external availabilities to actualize our purposes, right? That's why it's so hard to program a computer to actually do anything by itself, because it can't generate its own purposes on its own. And so the intentional arc. So here's the same like foreground background thing that we discussed earlier, and this has quite a dramatic impact on our idea of free will or determinism. So in this sense, we don't necessarily have complete free will because we're bound in the context of the world continuously, but we're also not just totally determined by the world itself, because we have certain agency to cope and move around and create intention within that system. Okay, and that leads us into grip. So grip is this concept that, everyone does this. It's so weird that people do this, they don't even think about it. Do you see what that thing on the table there? See, he just moved his head, right? Like, he can't see what's on the table, but he tries to reorient himself to better cope with it, right? It's like, how can I see that better? What's the best angle and position? And so now try to get a computer to do that, right? You have to first give it some sort of intention, and then you have to tell it exactly how it should do that. Living organisms just do that on their own. It's part of being alive, this constant reorientation. And grip is an interesting metaphor because if you've ever been doing pull-ups or you're trying to do as many as you can, and all of a sudden you get tired and you start losing your grip, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna fall. Like, or if you're like holding on to dear life and like, the 100-story building, right? So here's the idea of not only coping, but trying to maintain a certain aptitude or position within reality. It's about survivability, and it's about learning and mastery. And then there's expression. So expression is actually a really interesting concept. Expression, for Merleau-Ponty, is the imprint that your individual self has on everything else. Like my body is an impression. The way that my facial structure is, my color, the sound of my voice, all that's an impression. But also language itself and thoughts themselves are expressions. Okay, types of expression. So there's the other idea of analytic philosophy is that language is a certain set of disembodied rules and manifestations that we kind of learn somehow. Instead, language is a form of expression. It's completely transformative, and it's rooted in our embodied existence. So let me motivate that a little bit more by saying, most of my ability to communicate meaning to you actually doesn't come from the words that I say. There's a lot of body language, a lot of eye contact, a lot of facial movement. All that's important. There is a lot, and then when you think of what language is itself, language is my throat modulating so that you can get a sense of what that is like. And when you close your eyes and you think to yourself, you have that inner voice. Where does that come from? That sounds, so this is where the analytic philosopher kind of gets confused, because that's like disembodied, like you're not actually moving your mouth, right? But what you're actually doing is your brain's actually activating the same muscles that you use when you speak. And even though you're not actually needing to express, they're expressing anyway. So if you never learn how to speak, you wouldn't be able to think that way. And actually, deaf people don't think that way. Mute people don't think that way. And so when they research, that, oops, I lost it. When they research deaf people that know sign language, for example, they actually have like an internal finger, an internal facial expression, internal hand gesturing, right? So when they think cat, they think whatever cat is in sign language, right? When we think cat, we think, what do we do with our throats to make that sound? It's so like barbaric, whereas deaf people, they're so expressive, right? They think, hand movement up and sideways and whatever, and that's the cat to them. And so in a sense, expression is a form of gesturing, and language is just another type of gesture, just like everything else. And I lost it, but I will get back to it. Hold on. This is when I really hate not knowing how to use software better. But let's go to the end. I'm almost done. Little break. Okay, here. And then there's alterity. So alterity is this concept of you being embedded in a reality that is mostly not you, but that is actually what creates you. And as you move in and interact, you also shape the reality in return, right? So alterity allows for the initial existence in the first place, just like the first touch. When I first felt something, that's when I knew I was there. Isn't that funny? I can only know I'm here if there's something else out there that touches me. Alterity also implies what, it's another term, it's called the chiasm, and that is you can never actually breach that difference, though. So although it shapes you and transforms you, it gives you a lot of creative ability, it's a gap that can never be jumped over. Because if I was somehow eliminate the alterity between me and what's your name?
Nick.
Me and Nick, if we were to eliminate the alterity between us, we'd become the same person. We would be literally the same person, which would be weird. Anyways, so these are the concepts of Merleau-Ponty. And if I had more time, I would talk about how that solves particular philosophical problems that come up. But I want to conclude by just giving a general perspective on what his philosophy is all about. So through his phenomenological method, he concludes that we're embodied beings. We're bodied, embedded in constant interaction with our world. The contents of our consciousness emerge from these interactions. So they're not just manufactured by our brain. Our brain actually has a fairly passive role in this process. A lot of information processing happens. The world helps us do the information processing. We are neither free agents, moving without individual agency, nor are we completely constructed and determined. And we're both structured but expressive and transformative. So, in other words, we're endowed with certain characteristics, and those are tools that we can behave and interact with, and that could also change us and change the world around us. So that would be kind of just 4 statements of wrapping up his philosophy. So that's it. That's Merleau-Ponty. So I guess we can ask questions. Anybody have questions? How are you guys feeling?
Just trying to wrap my head around it because I'm so used to analytical.
Yeah. So what exactly is happening to you right now? What are you experiencing?
What am I experiencing? Is confusion a thing?
Confusion? Yes, of course.
Well, I mean, like, it's not confusion in the sense that it's like I get it, but it just seems so weird to think that our experiences emerge from interaction with the world. Like, I just keep thinking of it as being in my head, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's fascinating. So what the role of the brain in Merleau-Ponty's philosophy, the role of the brain is more of a note taker.
Oh.
So when something happens, when I hear things, my brain collects all that information just for future reference, and then brings that back when needed if necessary. So the brain itself. So there's another concept in cognitive science called situated cognition, but the idea is when you use devices, or like a calculator, or when you take notes on a sheet of paper, or have a calendar, you are offloading a lot of the mental processing onto those tools, right? And the reason why we're so awesome as organisms and why we can compete so well in the world is because we are able to have these tools. Other organisms don't, right? So when I use the calculator to compute, part of my brain is there. Calculator is there, it's part of the interaction. My mind, part of my brain isn't there. I'm saying my mind has been situated outside of my body to do that sort of computation. And that's really hard for artificial intelligence programs to be able to do, because artificial intelligence typically wants to create a computer that can do all that processing and information and purpose driving and all that within the computer itself, instead of creating a system that interfaces and can work within the world and be guided by and guide the world at the same time. So I think Merleau-Ponty would say that artificial intelligence in this sort of traditional format just can never happen. Just can never make it happen. Can never be truly intelligent. But also creating a mechanism that can interface with the world artificially is going to be very challenging. Because the only reason why we can do it is because we have millions and millions of years of co-evolving with the world. As the world changed, it changed us. So the reason why we have flesh is because it's so good, so useful, right? So I always say artificial intelligence is possible once we can create a computer that has its own flesh, has its own body, has its own will to live, and then maybe we can create something that's artificially intelligent. Anyways, yeah.
I just want to say that I love this because I became interested in philosophy after I went to a meditation retreat and I experienced body dissolution while I was there.
Oh, cool.
And I came back and I tried to tell my philosophy professor about it, and he was just trying to do the whole analytic framework on it and saying, these phenomena. But for me, I experienced it, and so it was just transformative.
Yeah.
And ever since then, I haven't really gotten back into looking at that experience. So this reminds me of it.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
What was it? Was it like an out-of-body experience?
My body, you can't explain it. You can't put it into words.
What
But
is it called?
I called it body dissolution.
Oh, okay.
But I was just like pure sensation. I can't even explain it. I've tried. You can't.
Yeah.
I mean, you would really have had to experience it, and that's what's attractive to me about phenomenology, because it's all about the experience. And there
About the
are
experience,
things
yeah.
that you just can't put into words.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's amazing, though.
That's why a lot of phenomenologists talk, and they use poems and metaphors and really like descriptive language that just, it's like, why did you say it that way? Like if you read Merleau-Ponty, he has like this sentence where it's like, the seeing touching of the touching touched of the touching seeing touches the seeing toucher, or whatever, something like that. And it's like, what the like, but you have to dissect every little bit of things, and you understand that he's referring back to these master concepts of like expression, the first touch, and like all this stuff. And so once you piece it all together, you realize there is an internal logic that makes sense. But when you're first reading it, you're like, oh my, this is nonsense, right? So it's easy to kind of miss out on the things like that. But anyways, yeah, that's great. Yeah, so phenomenology can provide a platform to kind of dissect and understand those experiences, especially experiences that are much more meaningful to an individual person. And that's the other reason why phenomenology and existentialism kind of came together. Existentialism is about like why we're here, why do we live, like what's our purpose, and these sorts of questions typically aren't asked by analytic philosophers because they're inaccessible. It's like why do we? There's a lot of the analytic reduction prohibits you from really discussing the full experience of human life and trying to make sense of it. Yeah, so there's that. Any other questions?
And what is meant by transformative in the context of alterity?
Yes. Okay. So you as a person can transform by interfacing or by interacting with differences that are out there. Like if you find someone that's very different than you, right? They don't like anything that you like, but you have this kind of sort of compulsion to get to know them, to become best friends. You're going to have to transform yourself and transform each other in the process of trying to do that. So that's just a social example. There's other examples, like growth itself is a transformative process. As an infant, you can only grow if you experience lots of feedback and interaction from your parents, from your mother, from the world, and from falling on the ground. That's the only way we learn how to walk, for example. So that's what it means by transformative. It also implies that so the interesting thing about phenomenology is that it avoids the problem of what's it called, solipsism, because so solipsism is a problem in analytic philosophy. The idea is maybe everything's in our mind, like maybe there's no world out there. It's sometimes also called idealism, but maybe, and also the other things, maybe I'm the only person that exists. Like, how do I really know that you guys are out there? I don't know. Like, how do I know you guys maybe you guys are just robots. Maybe you guys are zombies. Like, I don't know. Right? But that's only if I adopt this perception of things. But if the only reason why I'm here is because I'm embedded in a reality and I'm in a constant interaction with it, therefore that reality has to be there just by default. So there's no solipsism problem. It just doesn't, problem that doesn't even come up. I learned how to talk because there's other people that already know how to talk, for example. And I know that you guys are here because you guys are giving me attention, just in the same way that I know how to give attention to you guys. But anyways, so that's what it's meant by transformative. Any other questions? Yeah.
So, do you have anything to say about phantom limbs? Because I found that interesting.
Phantom limbs, yes. Okay, so what would the analytic philosopher say about phantom limbs? The analytic philosopher would say, well, how do we find limbs? Limbs are material things, and you clearly don't have an arm anymore. So there's nothing there. and you're just like delusional, or you're some weird psychological, like there's a neuron that's just misfiring in there, and you're just like, it just, there's nothing there, right? Phenomenology would say, well, no, you're experiencing your limbs still. So maybe there's more to limbs than just something physical. Maybe our sort of interaction with the world allows us to, or the way that we have intentional arcs, allows us to interface with the world that keeps us keeping these sort of the body parts alive. Now we would agree that phenomenology would say, yeah, materially it's not there, but maybe you still feel pain. So for example, there's the people that still feel pain because they feel like their hand is like clenched up. And they can't unclench it because they don't have a hand anymore, but they think that their hand is clenched, and it's a big problem. So what you do as a therapist, you have them put the hand their stub out, and then there's like this divider where they can't actually see their arm, but then they see another person's arm next to them. And so they say, okay, so there's an actor. And so then the person's like, so the person's supposed to enunciate what the person does. So he's like, I'm clenching my fist. So the actor clenches his fist, and then he's like, I'm going to let go of my fist now, and the actor lets go of his fist. And if there's enough of that therapy, there won't be pain anymore. No more pain. It's kind of cool. So now, if we didn't kind of give the individual's experience some sort of merit to begin with, that sort of therapy would probably have never emerged. We would probably just try to find where that neuron is in his brain and like shut it down or something like that, right? So that it wasn't happening. But in terms of, there's another concept that Merleau-Ponty talks about called indwelling. So the concept of indwelling is the process of actually feeling so accustomed to things that weren't at first part of your body, but then because you're so used to it and accustomed to it, it becomes as much as part of your body as your flesh. So for example, if you lose a leg and you get a prosthetic, you can use it really, really well. It's almost as if you didn't lose your leg. Or if you're a musician, the first time, I don't know, I play the violin, for example. First time you hold the instrument, it's like, oh, it's so weird, and it's clunky, and it feels uncomfortable, and I can't make sounds with my life, and, you know. But then after I get really, really good, I don't even have to think anymore. It's just like I just execute. Like I feel a song inside me, and it comes out of the violin, as if it's part of my body. So that's called indwelling. And indwelling is a process of interfacing so well that you can execute your will through something else. And you can indwell in people too. Sometimes. And that's kind of that's how you would become, maybe relationship forming. And then there's a lot of different concepts. There's also the concept of sojourning. So the word sojourning is when someone tries to indwell in you, but you don't want them to. So like your parents, for example, like this big issue between parents and kids. So the parents, I mean, when you're little, you're like an extension of your parents for all intents and purposes, you know. And as you grow up, you want your own intention. You want to do your own things. But your parents are like, why are you doing that? Like, I don't, like, explain to me exactly what's going on in your mind. Let me like restructure your thought patterns so that you do what I want you to do. And so that's the process of sojourning. And as that the parent is trying to indwell and exist within the child or the other person, and that typically causes a lot of problems. But yeah, so more questions. Merleau-Ponty is really fascinating.
How long have you been studying him for?
Probably for 4 years now, maybe. Yeah. And the reason why I actually found him very fascinating is because because he died writing like one of his most famous books, right? So he starts writing this book, and his book is about how you're in this constant web of interaction, right? You're interpreting the world, and that causes you to change the way you think about the world, but then that causes the way you change the world. And it's like, so this idea of a project of constant interrogation and reflection. And so he's trying to make a grand conclusion of all this, and he dies. So now we have like 3 or 4 philosophers, like other people that read his book, and like, okay, how can I finish this project? So they read his book, and they have their own version of him, and then people like constantly like want to reinterpret what he says. Like, I don't know what he really meant by this, but I think this means something to me. So all of a sudden you can indwell in Merleau-Ponty, but you can also have him become part of your life in a way that's very genuine, because no one can really be sure what he meant. It's kind of exciting. In 1959. Yeah, he died in 1961. I think, or he was in the process of writing it. Yeah, how do you guys like phenomenology as a way of
It's
thinking?
really interesting.
Yeah.
Like, I really like analytical philosophy, but I think it's interesting to be able to compare it to something else and like see.
Yeah.
Because I'm so used to that I think, oh, this is philosophy. This is its own little bubble. And
Yeah.
there's so much more.
There's
to
so much
philosophy.
more. It's so much more.
Do
Yeah,
you
it
put
just
those books there?
blows your
Are
mind.
those yours?
Those are my books. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So when I started this space, I just put all my library up here for people to like use and interact with. Yeah. So you can see all my Merleau-Ponty books
To interact with that.
to interact with. Yeah, exactly.
Using this language.
Uh-huh.
Do you know Drayson, the new professor?
No.
Oh, she does philosophy of mind. I'm not sure if she does any of this stuff.
She's
But
in fact coming to speak this Thursday.
Yay!
Ah.
Cool.
2:30. She's going to be talking kind of about consciousness, kind of more from an analytic lens,
Yeah.
probably,
yeah.
about determining consciousness
Yeah.
in people who are comatose.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh, Merleau-Ponty would have lots to say about that. That's awesome. So I can't speak. Sorry. To recap, what Merleau-Ponty would want is for analytic philosophers to take a look at his ideas and to try to apply that to the logical frameworks and create these conclusions of things, like to really understand. Once you have this very full picture of account, then you can carve out properties and distinctions and all this stuff, and you could be much more confident that you weren't too quick. You didn't make your judgments weren't so. I feel like analytic philosophers are like really impatient sometimes. It's like, gotta solve this puzzle. And let's not really sit back and reflect too much on what's going on. And because the problem is, there really isn't any end to that. So, in a sense, it's kind of the philosophy will never end. But that's what makes it cool, I think. Just like life. Yeah. Anybody else? You guys haven't said much. What do you guys think? Was it what you were expecting?
I'm an analytic philosopher.
Yeah.
I don't really agree with a lot of things that, what was his name?
Merleau-Ponty.
Merleau-Ponty said, yeah.
Cool.
I have a lot
Yeah.
of counterexamples, I guess.
Challenged by. Oh, great. Love counterexamples.
Specifically like artificial intelligence, like I believe that we could get to that point where we wouldn't be able to tell the difference, essentially, between an organic organism and an artificial machine.
Yeah.
And I don't think it would have to have like flesh per se. It could just be
A ton of sensors, just a bunch of
yeah,
sensors.
exactly.
Even like X-ray vision, even it would have but it would also be then possibly fulfilling the definitions of phenomenology, because then it would be experiencing reality, and
Yeah.
through that feedback loop of experience, it would gain a consciousness.
It would. Yeah.
If it was just merely an
Yeah.
entity unto itself that was just interacting with its own data,
Yeah.
it wouldn't have a consciousness
Yeah.
in any way that we would perceive it as.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's very true. Very true. So I guess it depends on how you define intelligence. So potentially you can create an artificial intelligence that has such a different experience than us that we would probably not be able to communicate. They would still be intelligent. They would still be able to do things in the world, right, and cope and live and survive. So there's that. Maybe that's fascinating. Either way, if you define intelligence as human intelligence, then Merleau-Ponty would say you need a human body. But if you define intelligence as something else, as maybe something that does this, has intentional art, grip, expression, alterity, maybe you can artificially do that. You don't need to have a human body to do this necessarily. So yeah, it can be a being of some sort. Yeah, fundamental is a being. So yeah, and actually a lot of animals, like the bacteria, they show these things, and other animals that we don't necessarily think are intelligent as well. But yeah, so I agree with you. I think that you can create an artificial intelligence, but I think before artificial intelligence, you need to create an artificial life form of some sort.
For what purpose?
In order for it to manifest these things, it would have to be alive somehow.
It would have to have an impetus or a reason for being.
Yeah.
Like a will to live, kind of.
Okay, so do you
Yeah.
think there's like an inherent purpose to organic life?
Oh,
Existentialism.
that's existential. Yeah. I wouldn't say there's necessarily an inherent purpose, but we're constantly driven by purposes all the time. Purpose is like it's a temporal thing.
Depends which purpose.
At this moment, like I really want pizza right now.
I
Right.
think we could all agree.
Yeah.
Uh,
That purpose, like, deep.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like,
But maybe we have one of those too. But then that's something that would go outside of Merleau-Ponty's sort of school of thought. That would be for him something that's unknowable, really.
What that purpose?
If we have some sort of like genuine purpose, or like I don't know, some.
Like, what's the criteria for purpose that the machine can't satisfy
I see.
without a flesh body? I guess.
For it to situate itself in the world and interact with it without having it to be programmed to do that.
oh, like intentionality.
Intentionality, yeah. For it to, and so yeah, so that's kind of interesting, yeah. So, like I don't know if you guys have cats, right? Cats are really random creatures, right?
They just ran.
They're just
run
like I want to run back and forth now, and then I just want to sleep now. Like, it's why do they exist? What purpose do they have? Well, but they still have intentionality, right? Yeah. So yeah, so I like your critiques. They're good. I think Merleau-Ponty would like them too.
Well, in that case, couldn't you just plug a computer into a random number generator, and how does that fit in with intentionality?
Yeah, I think intentionality isn't necessarily random, but I think I use the word random pretty loosely. But I think if it's genuinely random, it's also not intentional. It's kind of really out of your control. It's like, I'm hungry, but I can't because the random number generator tells me I have to go to that bathroom now. Yeah, like, or whatever.
So how would you say, like an algorithm that learns to play chess based on other people playing chess with it, how would you say that fits into that category of like gaining its own purpose through interacting with the world and its own intentions?
Yeah, I think the intention was pre-programmed. The intention to win that game.
But like
That's the only thing it can do.
Technically wasn't. Like it learned that through what it did with, or what the other person might have done, and like through failing and succeeding.
Yeah. You're talking about neural networks, and that's
Isn't that kind of what we're doing?
that's an attempt. Yeah. So neural networks is as close as we can get to an embodied sort of system, and that neural networks actually happened because they were inspired by non-dualist sort of thinking. Because up to that point, it was everything had to be like hard-coded. The idea was like,
I think we're just at an infinite stage right now, so
yeah.
like we don't have much to show, but we still kind of do.
Yeah, I think the limitation with neural networks is that the quality of feedback is still very limited, right? Because our skin, there's an infinite number of sensors here. I mean, probably not infinite, because we only have a certain number of neurons, but the amount of complexity required to artificially create that would just be impossible. I think impractical. Maybe at some point in the future. Yeah, I'm hopeful. I don't think it's impossible, but I think it's only possible if you carefully dissect the sort of phenomenology of why we are what we are. Yeah.
But also with the chess thing, isn't it like programmed to evolve? So I feel like, I don't know, it doesn't really have intentionality in that sense. Even though it's like adapting, it's like artificial intelligence, but it's like really artificial adapting.
Yeah, it's caged.
Yeah.
It can evolve within that cage. I think that's an interesting idea. I think you can still have intentionality within a cage, potentially. I don't know.
Even if it's like limited intentionality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're all in a sense caged in some way.
That's true.
Yeah.
It just has a more limited scope than us.
Yeah, right, exactly. So maybe potentially we've created an artificial chess creating thing, or chess playing thing, which is literally what we've done, obviously. So the intelligence of that is genuine, but only to the extent of the chess. And because we can have intelligence that transcends that, we might not consider it intelligent. But maybe it really genuinely is experiencing chess playing. We just might not know.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, question.
Yeah, I just have a question. Like, do you think intentionality is compatible with the phenomenology consciousness? Because for me, like, I feel like there is cognitive consciousness which you are yourself, like, are conscious of what you're thinking about. But a lot of times, yeah, the consciousness is just like phenomenology about biological interactions with the, like you said, with the environment. So, do you think like intentionality is compatible with
Ah,
phenomenology?
I see. I need to dissect. You said a lot there, so I need to dissect each component bit. But this is what I propose. I propose breaking out the pizza and eating and chatting amongst ourselves, and I can talk to you more off camera. And yeah, cool. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.